center there. So plateau down the center that's colored, that's illustrated here, and then wetlands on both sides. So it really limits what we can develop and narrows down the study for the project team. Some guiding principles. We set these principles early on in the project that would really be the sort of the principles that would drive the project moving forward. So I'll just kind of read through these really quick. Preserve, protect, and enhance the natural character. Expand trail access to provide immersive ecological experiences and moments of connection. Understand and maintain connections to the varied and historic uses of the land. Leverage the unique ecology of the place for learning and experiential education. Provide safe, welcoming, and equitable access to park amenities. Create safe connections between nearby neighborhoods and amenities. Provide restroom and shelter to support the park as a destination serving the East Hill North and Greater Kent community. Establish a framework for a great park now and plan for the future. Support multi-generational use of the park by providing playful experiences and manage stormwater and other development with low-impact design strategies. So really trying to minimize our footprint, enhance the natural character of the site, and provide the much-needed community park destination that this area of the city sorely needs. We stepped into round one engagement with some exercises. We were able to engage with 634 people. Through that round one engagement, we held 9 different events, and we had an online survey that resulted in 168 responses. These are photos from some of these events. We had all different kinds of events. We had pop-up events. We had an organized event in the park, which was really well attended, really happy with the outcome of that meeting, some really engaging conversations with a lot of different groups of people there. So this is the listing of the events. We really tried to take our show on the road, take the materials to the people where they were, so not just asking them to come and visit us in a public meeting setting, but also going to things like farmers market, going to parks where people are playing, so in Green Tree and Chestnut Ridge, going to the Safeway, trying to catch people before they go in the store and get their groceries, and actually people were really willing to talk to us. I have to give really all the credit for the public engagement to our staff, Carrie O'Connor and Michael Espinan, who really led that process and were there for all those discussions and documenting everything along the way. Over on the right-hand side here, we did a fun treasure map that was part of the experience that we had for the on-site meeting. That was the one that was on July 10th. So we had a little activity for kids so that they could go out into the park, and we had little buckets of things that they could collect along the way. But it invited people to the park who maybe had never been there to go out and experience it for themselves and kind of understand the beauty, the natural character of the site. So a lot of fun activities, really good outcomes with all of that engagement. We also had a kit of parts exercise at the site. So we had an overall site plan. We had pieces that people could place and move around to tell us where they thought made the most sense to place these things on the park. And then all that data was collected into a heat map. So our consultants collected all this stuff, compiled it into a really complex view of all the different amenities on site. And then that really went into kind of the further study of how we would organize the park spatially. So all of this feedback that we received through the round one engagement resulted in a park program that would really drive the conceptual design of the park, the master planning of the park, into the next phase of engagement. So the proposed park program was trails, very clearly top kind of the list of what people wanted to see on the site, a restroom because it is a community park, shelter and tables for people to sit and gather, parking, seating. Nature-based experiences was really high on the list, again, just because of the character of the place. It really provides those opportunities inherently to the park. Meadows, forest, views, invasive plant removal and restoration to support native meadows, and new and improved entry points. People were really desiring access to the park, not just through vehicular transportation, but really looking at non-motorized means to get to the park. I think it was over half of the responses that we got in the survey were people who wanted to get to this park without getting in their car. So either walking, biking, taking a bus, or some other form of transit. Then that brought us into the round two engagement. We had 665 people that we engaged with through that process. We held 4 different events and we received 98 comments. Here's the list of events that we had and some pictures associated with those events. A little bit smaller turnout this time around, but really engaging discussions with the folks who attended these meetings. So we held events again at the Safeway, trying to intercept people where they, as part of their daily rituals, and getting them to engage with us on the project. We held a couple of events at the elementary school, and then we did go to the Lake Meridian concert series. Part of what we were talking about in the round 2 engagement was working through 3 different options of site plans. So the one in the upper left-hand corner is the existing site. You just saw that diagram earlier in the presentation. And then our consultants came up with kind of 3 different versions of how we would lay out the things that we heard through the round 1 engagement. So all those things that people voted on with that kit of parts exercise kind of landed on the site in various ways and organization. And these 3 options. So we'll move through these options and I'll talk a little bit about what kind of separates each one of these from the other. So the first one, option A, we call it drumlin. In this option, the development is really tight to 2/16. So we keep that development as close to 2/16 as we possibly can. The development is pretty compact and very tight. It doesn't spread out across the site very much. The play in this one is pretty dispersed, and what I mean by that is you've got kind of the formal play area here, and then it moves down the site with some nature play, so it's a little bit more linear and spread out. And the other thing to note about this option is it actually tries to utilize the existing trails and the form of those existing trails as much as possible, as opposed to changing the alignment of trails. It said, take what's there and just make it a little bit better. In option B, which was called braided stream, a little bit of a different view of the parking. It's got a circular drive here and the parking that kind of radiates around that circular drive. In this option, the formal park kind of comes into the heart of the park a little bit more. It pulls away from 2/16. So the red rectangle that you see, this is the restroom building. The play kind of comes down into the center of the park with the formal lawn, big views that ride along this edge that come out into the park. So again, pulling that away from 2/16 into the park so that people have that full experience in the park and can appreciate those views. A little bit more development, I would say, into the park has a little bit more of an impact on the natural landscape. So that's kind of the push-pull of these options. This one also showed an option of developing some formal parking down near the eastern edge of the property. This is informal parking today. It's a gravel lot, so looking at, do we want to explore ideas of having an overflow parking lot that's more formalized down there on the eastern edge? So yeah, those are the things associated with. I think the other thing I wanted to mention on this one is that because the play comes into the center of the park a bit more, it allows us to have that play go over the topography of the park. You know, think about West Fenwick and how, what's really playful about West Fenwick is you're able to go up and get to the top and use the topography in order to do that. This option would allow us to bring that play kind of onto the slope of the park and be able to use that slope in a playful way to create a little bit of a different play experience. So that's something else that was unique about Braided Stream. Option C is called Winding Pathway, and this one is pretty unique, I think, is particularly the way that parking is handled. So rather than parking being in one centralized location, this disperses the parking along a park road. So you can kind of see, you would have your entry into the park road, the parking that's kind of along there, front end parking, and then the park road would exit around the other end. There's other park locations. I'm thinking about the library in Maple Valley that kind of has a similar setup where it's really kind of in the woods or out in the landscape as opposed to one kind of big footprint of a parking lot. A little bit of a different look and feel and could be appropriate for this site. So that was something that was different about this one. The other thing I think that's unique here is that traditional play, so that's going to be this area here in yellow, and some of the nature play are much more connected. So in other options, they were sort of separate, and that one nature play would be kind of off in the wooded area, and the traditional play would be on the other side. And this one, those are sort of commingled in a space where it would blur the lines from one to the other. You wouldn't really even be able to tell where nature play stops and starts and where traditional play picks back up. And so I think we'll see that in some of the inspirational imagery that we'll see a little bit later on in the presentation. I think the other thing to note about this one too is that the restroom building is not centered in the design. It's kind of up here near the entry of the park, which is again a very different experience from having that restroom and pulling it into the center and having it be kind of a focal point for the park. So all these were posted to engagekentparks.com. for comment. So we have a way for people to drop comments in on these plans. We had close to 100 different comments on the plans themselves. It was a good way for us to collect feedback. This is just one example of one of the comments that says, I would like to see as many trees preserved as possible. We heard a lot of that kind of stuff of preserving the natural landscape, so I thought it was a good example of the kind of feedback we received. So this is how we got feedback on those 3 options. And generally, the way we ask these questions is don't choose one of the 3. It's not about choosing one or the other. It's what do you like about each one of these options? What would you if it was a menu, what would you pick from these options, and what do you like and dislike about them? So we got some great feedback through that process, and what we heard is that this is a natural place, and it should stay that way. Focus the park improvements on trails, viewing, and other less active programs. So again, an emphasis on passive over active. Such as seating, smaller gathering places, use natural colors and materials for site furnishings and structures, and elements that allow for connection with nature. Don't put big, bright colored play equipment. Make it something that's going to feel integrated with the landscape. Create site-specific, nature-based play with a mix of designated play structures and informal play spaces and materials such as logs, boulders, and plantings. Provide a variety of trail types that are sensitive to the nature of the site, from highly accessible paved trails all the way down to nature trails and pathways. So give a varied experience of trails through the site. It doesn't all have to be the same. Provide better access to the park. We already talked about that. People really want to get to this, leaving their house and just walking to the park as opposed to having to get into their car. So thinking about those connections along 132nd and into the park from there. Preserve existing shelter. So that's really talking about the arena, the big structure that's on site. Design improvements to be compatible with its location in the wetland buffer, such as more passive activities. Consider improvements or expanded use in future phases. And these are sort of like integral to just doing a community park. Provide restroom, parking, shelters, and other basic facilities to support a range of gathering and events that are typical to a community park. So that's what we heard in the round 2 engagement. In total, throughout the whole engagement process, we held 13 different events. We, in person, engaged with over 1,300 people, and then through EngageKentParks.com, we had various people engaged, informed, or aware of the project. So 168 people engaged with the project, 1,200 plus informed, and over 4,000 people who were aware of what's going on with the project. Over 98 comments on the website. So really a pretty successful public engagement process, particularly for a single project. Something we're really proud of, and I think really we can move forward with this project into phases of design with a lot of confidence that we collected good, earnest feedback from the community and have a really set vision for where we're going here. So that leads me to the master plan itself, kind of what we've been waiting on here. This is the final master plan that we've landed on through the first 2 rounds of engagement. Our consultants taking all that feedback, synthesizing it into something that's illustrative that shows the final vision for the park. So you've got the colored area kind of in the center here. This would be really what I would consider kind of the formally developed park space. Don't take that to mean that all of it gets impacted. A lot of this space, really those areas that are kind of that beige, kind of brownish color are all going to be meadow restoration. So it's really about preserving and enhancing the existing landscape there. The impacts that you would feel in development is really isolated to this space here, right? So it's this space. The things I would point out about this is it takes a lot of different elements of the 3 design options that we had. This does show a park drive kind of coming in and moving out of the park with the dispersed parking. People really liked that option. But it also gives the opportunity for us to expand parking in the future. So this little centerpiece is likely not going to be done in phase 1, but would be part of a future expansion as the popularity of the park grows and we have an increasing demand for parking on site. Similar to what we saw with the braided stream option is that people did like the idea of pulling the play and some of the formal park elements into the more central location of the park so that people can have that sort of fully immersive nature experience while also experiencing, the typical amenities, restroom, play, trails, things like that. So what we see is that the play component is kind of pulled in. The restroom building is going to be right here, and that restroom building is going to be a combined shelter and restroom, so it'll kind of have serve both of those needs. And then you've got the formal lawn space. So this would be kind of the only area of the park, that little green patch that you see just west of the restroom building would be the only manicured lawn space that you would see on site. The rest of it would all be sort of native sort of prairie meadow type grasses that you would see in the landscape there. And then we have the connection to the Seuss Creek Trail. It's a faint line, but you can kind of see it switch back down the hillside here and then connect over to 216th and then connect over to the Seuss Creek Trail. So those are kind of the primary parts. We'll talk about them in a little bit more detail. The other thing I wanted to mention about this plan is that we need to rename this. East Hill North Community Park is not the most attractive name. We need to shorten it. We need to make this a little bit more marketable, I think, as a park. And so I just want to say that that's definitely still on our radar. We need to work on a timeline associated with that renaming, and I think as we move through the design process, we'll have a renaming competition to kind of come up with the appropriate name for the park at a later date. This is a pedestrian access diagram. It kind of shows how are people, if we're going to promote people arriving to this park through non-vehicular modes, how would they do it? So there's a lot of different options of what we could do. It's not to say that we're going to do all of these things, but these are the ways that we kind of see it. On 132nd, we know that there's a need for additional sidewalks along 132nd. This is something we've talked about for a very long time. It's something that's talked about within the Transportation Master Plan. You know, it'll take time to make these projects live and find the funding to be able to support them. We're continuing to work very closely with Public Works and partnering with them on how do we improve, you know, pedestrian access along 132nd. So I think there's ways for us to look at connecting the neighborhoods that come over from 218th and also 214th from the top on the north side to try and get them to the park along 216th and into the park. What we really need to do, I think, on the park side is figure out how do we get people from 132nd into the formal park, because they got to go across a couple of spaces. One, they have to go across some pretty steep topography through here. And so to do that in an accessible way is going to be quite challenging. That's why you see the switchbacks. This is conceptual. It's going to require a lot more switchbacks than is shown here to actually achieve that accessibility, but it's something that we have set as a goal of this project is to be able to get people to the formal space of the park, what we're calling the core park program in orange there, in an accessible means. So they got to come down that slope, then they've got to go across a large wetland, which is that BPA corridor that you see kind of moving north and south along here. So the dashed line that you see along the center, those would be boardwalks that would have to be done and all the permitting associated with that to be able to get them across. We would not do both of these. We would choose the best option. That's going to require some further analysis a little bit later on. On the south end, one of the things that was highlighted in all the engagement, and we had some really great conversations with, you know, residents in the area, but we also know that there's a really strong equestrian use in and around this park. The equestrian trail that's managed by King County runs north-south. It's the orange line that's on the eastern edge of our property. And in talking with them about their needs and some of the conflicts that they've experienced over the years of this trail being here and our park being here is that residents want to get into the park from the south. So that yellow line indicates a desire from the public to be able to walk to this park from the south. In fact, when we had our on-site meeting, lots of people got to the park through that south entrance. But the only way for them to get there today is to walk along the equestrian trail, which obviously creates some conflicts of users. Really, the equestrian trail, because of the nature of that use, big, large animals, you really don't want to mix kids and families with that kind of use. It creates some potentially dangerous situations. And so I think one of the things we really need to work on as part of this plan is negotiating with King County, because they are the managers of that equestrian trail, to create a separated, you know, having a fence in place that delineates equestrian trail over here, pedestrians and bikes over here, so that we can get users into the site safely from the south. So that's something we need to work on. We have been in constant communication with King County throughout this process. They're very aware of our park planning effort, and they're very supportive of everything we've got on this plan. In addition to that, we also heard from the community that people want to get to the Seuss Creek Trail. There's not really a good way to do it today because all along here is really sensitive ecological wetland and habitat. So boardwalking across it is going to be a long-term project. It's going to be a tough one, but it's definitely achievable. We also know that boardwalking midstream along here just creates more conflicts with the equestrian users. And so right now we're showing is a pink line at the top that says we need to make a connection to the Sioux Creek Trail that's more deliberate than it is today. We have limited real estate on 216th in order to do that, so we need to work with King County Parks to be able to achieve that. And we would think that would be a part of a partnership project in the future to figure that out. Okay, I think that's all to talk about on that. I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive.
A quick question.
Yeah.
You didn't talk too much about the horse. I know there was some concerns earlier about the horses. Did we ever get that resolved, or if the people that brought that concern? Or,
Yeah, I think really what it amounted to is, I think, a misunderstanding about what we can and cannot do on parkland. And so I think people were thinking we were taking an amenity away from equestrian users. We are not. The equestrian trail is going to stay where it is. In fact, I would say we're going to improve that condition. Like I said, there's conflicts that happen today because of users arriving into the park from the south, walking on the equestrian trail. We want to try and fix that problem. I think we also want to fortify the edge of our property so that it's very clear where our park stops and where the equestrian trail begins. We had really great conversations with that community throughout the public process. One of the things we talked about, and actually your question is timely, because one of the things we worked with them on is creating a place for them to get off the trail and come and enjoy our park, right? These are users that use the equestrian trail. They're oftentimes riding for long mileage. They need to have places to water their horse, go to the bathroom, fill up their water bottle, stop for lunch under one of our shelters. And so we wanted to create a space where they could park their horse and be able to come into the park. So that's that little orange half circle that you see right there. We're calling it a hitching post and a watering station, basically, for the horses. And that's something that we plan on working with King County, to figure out how we work out the appropriate land, management and operational needs for them to have a facility on our parkland that supports one of their facilities, which is the equestrian trail. So, long story short, yes, we've been working closely with that community to make sure that they know that their facility is preserved and will stay what it is today.
Hello, Terry. Councilmember Fincher has a question.
Thank you. Looking at those art garden and community space, what was the idea behind that one?
Yeah, so I'm going to get to that here in just a couple slides. So right now, I just wanted to kind of show the overall, and then what I'm going to step into is some imagery that's going to give you an idea of what's going to appear in each of those spaces. So just let me do a quick reminder of what is on the plan. So yellow is generally play, so that's children's play, whether it be traditional play or nature-based play. We've got the shelter that's centered there, and shelter/restroom, which is centered in the park in between the play and the formal lawn. We have the parking. The red boxes that you see, those are additional shelters. So there's one here and one there. And then we have the arena, which is here. I also want to note that the trails are different colors, and there's a reason why there's different colors on those trails. This kind of solid line, white, and kind of pale blue, those are going to be trails that meet accessibility standards. So there will be a loop as part of the formal park that will be paved, either asphalt or concrete. The light blue line would be a crushed rock pathway, so that's kind of leading you out into the park, more into the natural landscape. We want something that's an organic surface but still meets ADA standards, so that would be, a crushed rock standard. And then all the brown pathways would be, natural surface, either dirt or mulch, so that you can have kind of that real immersive nature experience. So there's a hierarchy of trails associated with this. So I just wanted to kind of remind you of this, and now let's step into some of the inspirational imagery. So this kind of shows what the play would look like on site. Again, I don't think this is an appropriate place for big, bright colors. There's a time and a place for that. West Fenwick is a great example of where that works really well, but I think here, where there's a really strong desire from the community to emphasize the natural character of the place, that natural tones, using natural elements or things that mimic natural elements, things that look like logs and boulders and things like that, and integrating those into play is how this will look like. So that's really nature-themed play and nature-based play kind of all being one campus of play within the park. This is kind of shows you what that nature play may look like. Boulders kind of balancing log tunnels, having big root wads that have fallen over. These are all things that I think are really creative and cool and create a sense of place in the playground. Talked about the hierarchy of trails, so this shows a little bit more detail about that. Kind of image 1, 2, and 3 would be, those ADA accessible trails that would kind of give you the full loop experience. but you could do it if you have mobility impairment. And then 4, 5, and 6 really talks about more of the nature experience of trails that you would have on the site as well. So definitely a varied and mixed set of trails that you would have on site that kind of gives the full range of experiences there. Picnic, seating, and gathering. I think we are going to have shelters on site right now. We're showing 3. On the bottom right hand, number 6, that kind of shows the restroom shelter combined facility, kind of like what you see at Three Friends Fishing Hole, something like that. I think being creative with seating is something like we did at Chestnut Ridge. These are all great ideas that we could easily integrate into this park site. The other thing I wanted to take note of here is the shelter idea in the bottom left-hand corner, number 4. So right now what we're planning is in phase 1, we would do restroom and shelter, with the idea that in the future, we would have the option of expanding it to a small community gathering space, so an indoor community gathering space. So again, just trying to create space for these ideas in the future. It was not funded. It's something that would be, part of a down the road type of project, but being able to leave ourselves some room to create some modest amount of community gathering space in a place that definitely needs it in the East Hill North. Lawn activities, again, emphasizing passive over active. So this would be, lawn games, kind of informal play, putting blankets out, sitting, that sort of thing. That's what we're imagining for that space. Integrating art into the landscape. I think standalone art is good, but also art that has form and function within the park is something that we should definitely be looking at here. And having viewing decks and platforms, because there is definitely wildlife out here. Audubon Society is already talking to us because they go out there often, so the birding is definitely a big part of the activities in the park. And then integrating art with play, so swings that are custom, that have a nature-themed element to them. Interpretive signage, storytelling, education will definitely be a big part of the park. The Astronomical Society is reaching out to us often about using this as a stargazing site, so that's definitely something that we want to support for the park moving ahead. And there's all sorts of great stories to tell here, the history of this particular piece of property, indigenous history, so on and so forth. The arena is something that we want to invest in as part of the project, whether it be in phase 1 or future phases. I think that really flexibility is key. I think designing hard elements in this is going to be kind of limit future opportunities. So I think what we plan is really to take the space, create more of a formal landing within that, so harden the space so that it's accessible and usable for all different types of small-scale events or gathering types of events. I think it could be small cultural events. I think it could be things like farmers markets or those types of smaller-scale events. I think it could also potentially be a place where we have wedding reservations. It is such a scenic place that I could see those types of things happening there. But I think on a daily basis, we're looking at more of an art kind of garden installation there that would support kind of daily use of that arena. And this really just highlighting the natural features of the site. It's a really wonderful place today. It has a varied landscape. It's ecologically diverse. It also has a lot of invasive plants. It's covered in blackberry through the BPA corridor. We have knotweed, so there's definitely going to be a big invasive species and investment in mitigation plantings along the site as well. Let's talk about phasing. So the colored area is what we hope to do with phase 1. We have a long road to go. We have not started design. We need to step into design. So a lot of the estimates that we have right now have high contingencies associated with them. Right now, what we're calling phase 1 is currently estimated at $7 million. We'll get to the slide here in a second, but that definitely is beyond our current funding. So we have work to do to get this within budget. It's definitely achievable. We can get there. I also think there's options for us to get additional funding. We'll talk about that here in a second. The things that fall outside of phase 1 are those connections to 132nd. So we need to figure out how that gets built. It's going to require further study. I also think that's a great opportunity for us to work with a partner on that project. There's such large areas of restoration that need to happen that we've kind of put those into phase 2 as well to kind of minimize our footprint and our impact to the site. So we would be taking on some of the restoration work in a future phase. The parking in the northeast corner, that's the kind of informal parking that's there today, the gravel lot, that would be outside of phase 1. And as I mentioned before, the parking expansion in the center So that's this piece right here. That would be part of a future phase. We'd get 31 stalls in phase one. That would add another 20 stalls, so 50 total stalls on site with the expanded parking lot at some point in the future. And then also, like I said, the restroom building and any expansion of community gathering space there, that would not be in phase one. We would just do the restroom and the shelters. The area that's illustrated is stuff that we have. Well, let's just go to that. So we have project budget for phase one is currently estimated at $7 million. The funding sources that we have, $1.9 million from Department of Commerce. This is the one we got back in 2021, kind of the original catalyst of the project. $1 million of ARPA funding, $1 million of Parks Capital coming from REIT. $800,000, this is pending, but we're pretty confident we're going to get this funding from King County Parks. So we applied for a grant. We think we're going to be successful on that one. We're waiting on the announcement of the most recent Department of Commerce funding, but we think we're going to get another $1 million from that. So that results in $5.76 million total that we have today with a couple of pending. So pretty confident in that as our funding. So we're about 1.25 off from that. Again, not insurmountable. We have a lot of work to do. There's some value engineering work to do. We could push some additional work into a future phase. It's all definitely very achievable from this point. Future funding options, I think we've opened the door with King County Parks and established that there needs to be some partnership on this project because no matter what we do as far as design and management, this is going to be a Seuss Creek trailhead, flat out. So they need to be making some investment. And they've told us that they want to make an investment in this location to support its use as a trailhead for Seuss Creek. So they're interested in things like parking, restroom, pedestrian connections from the neighborhood, those sorts of things. So ongoing discussions with them about how to get them to help support the project. We'll continue to apply for grants as they come up. We've been really successful on this project so far. And there's always the option of putting additional Parks Capital. Because of the budget that we have, only $1 million of that 5.7 is coming from Parks Capital. Schedule, moving ahead. We're going to move fast. Like I said, we feel really good about the public engagement that we've done, and so we want to move full steam ahead into design. So, basically, this is my last step to say the plan is good, move ahead. So master plan adoption, I'm kind of calling that master plan adoption. So this is summer 2023, and then we would move immediately into 30% design, hopefully wrapping up in the fall of 23, 60% design in spring of 24. 100% design and permitting in summer of 2024, and then bidding and construction in the winter of 24. So we would be under construction in 2025, start of 2025. That's the goal. And it has to be because our funding sources have some strings tied to them to be able to get to that. So I know my goal, and that's what we're moving towards. Okay, I'm done. I'm happy to answer any questions that you got.
Great presentation. In my understanding, there's no action from the board, just more council, I should say. Just an update on what's going on, the status, and where we're at. Just real quickly, this just kind of popped in my mind. I think just the naming of that would be a lot of fun. I'm thinking about the kids have a little contest at Sunrise Elementary. To be able to name something like that would be just something to think about, right? So just a little contest.
A Sunrise versus the other school across the street.
Seuss Creek Elementary, Emerald Creek Elementary.
Seuss Creek.
Yeah, Seuss Creek, yeah.
And Sunrise.
Yeah, that'd be kind of a fun thing to do for the kids. So anyway, okay, Councilmember McCoy.
Thank you, Council President. Quick question. So are we going to have additional feedback on this from the community?
I think there will be opportunities for us to get feedback from. I think if we're going to hit our deadlines, we have to move pretty quick. And so lengthy processes like we just experienced would not be possible. I think it would really be a matter of posting iterations of design and letting people take a look. And if they've got issues or things they want to tell us, that they could let us know. But like I said, we would not be able to hold like multiple public meetings and
Makes sense.
just kind of setting expectations on what's really possible given the funding sources we've got. That's why we spent so much time on the front end. It's like, let's do this in a complete way. Let's really prove that we've listened and then we incorporated that feedback and that we've got a really solid project so that we can move quick once we got through that process.
That makes sense. There's good amount of feedback from the community, but I think it just makes kind of, if community is engaged and involved and they see what's happening and they give some type of feedback, even virtually, or you would do social media campaign or whatever, I think that
Easy
be
stuff
great.
for us to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you, Councilman McCoy. Councilman Michelle.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Terry, and Carrie and Brian so much for working on this. I agree with Councilmember Core. I definitely think there needs to be some feedback on this final design. Whether, just throw it up on engagekentparks.com and let people give feedback. That would be good. I'm wondering how much feedback there was about lawn space. Like, people really wanted that at this park?
Yeah, they wanted a small amount of lawn space for, again, it just gives options for gathering. Shelters often fill up if you don't show up early. And if you don't have some kind of lawn space to lay out a blanket, to have a stroller, to let your kid roll around, it's kind of hard on families. And so we definitely heard from folks that they didn't want it to be big, right? Because, again, preserving the natural character was top priority. But to have a modest amount of lawn space, I just think creates more capacity for the park to let users come and gather.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fincher?
Thank you. You mentioned that you were very pleased with the engagement, the community engagement that took place at the park. How did you advertise that one? Did you do anything different? What do you think the difference was?
I think, in my mind, the difference is excitement around a new park. I think people were really eager to see this park come online, and we had a lot of people coming, like they knew about it. Like we did all our normal stuff. We do, send it out through the mayor's newsletter. We're sending it out through Peach Jar. We're sending it out through our social media. We did mailers within a 2-mile radius. I mean, we burst out for every available, outlet that we had to get the message out about this. I think the difference on this project versus maybe some other projects is because it's a new park and there's a lot of excitement around it, people really wanted to come out and tell us what they thought and engage with us on the project. And I found people to really understand the site and know what they wanted, as opposed to sometimes people come to meetings and they don't really know what you're there to talk about. These are people who are coming informed and really energetic about the conversation. So, as far as outreach, I think we do a pretty good job of kind of hitting all the available outlets. I think Carrie does a really good job of kind of going to places and intercepting people. I think that played a big role in it too, is not only putting the onus on people to come to us, but instead taking our show out into the public and just being there when people are moving through a space, whether it's a farmer's market or a community event or, like I said, Safeway. We had really great access to people just hanging out in front of a grocery store. So I think being varied in the approach and having a lot of different ways for people to engage with us makes the biggest difference.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councilmember Lammer.
Thank you, Council President. Terry, so you said that the connection with 132nd would not be included in phase 1, and I totally understand that from funding reasons. But I remain very, very concerned about just, I think, the natural flow of people getting to that park. Is there's so many residents on the west side of 132nd, they're going to naturally, be crossing right at the crest of that hill. And we just don't have good trails there. So can you tell me a little bit about conversations we've had with Public Works about some crossing safety or anything in that area, knowing that, a large portion of the population that will be using the park will have to cross 132nd?
Yeah, so it's not in the current phase because of funding restraints, like you pointed out, but it's not to say that it won't happen in close timing with the rest of the project. Our conversations with Public Works have been, this is an important project. We need to provide pedestrian access to the site. Some signalized protected crossing of 132nd will be important to get all, the 900 residents that I called out in the beginning of the presentation, to get them access to the site. It needs funding associated with it. So we have to do some work to go and seek out funding to be able to make those projects happen. It's not part of someone's work plan today. It needs to become part of someone's work plan, and I can't make the call that says this is now a priority. So it has to move through a process in order to get there. But it's documented through this process. We've been active in our discussions with Public Works, and they've been great partners with us on this project to say this is important. We need to try and figure out a way to make it happen. I just can't make commitments today on what the timing of that would be. So ongoing, we know it's a priority, we know it's important.
Okay. Just one final comment, I think, to my colleagues. I think it's something we need to consider when we have our next budget talks, because I'm still just super nervous about that crossing.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Councilman Lumber. Hey, I had a question. Okay, and it's gone away. I'll talk to you later. All right, any other question, team? Oh, I did. It came back. Hey, as we designed this here part, I mean, the homeless population, are we thinking about designing it in a way that it wouldn't attract
Yeah,
that?
I am constantly, on guard to build resilient facilities that will not falter.
Okay.
And when those things happen, they will.
Yeah.
Inevitably, these things happen at every park we have. I think the key, and I've said this before, use is king. If people come to the park and they use the park and we have a constant flow of people through the park, and what drives that is building a place worth caring about, building something special, like we've done with some of our other parks, these things tend to not be as big of a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do things like that. Our parking lot will have gates, right? With all of our big community
Okay.
parks, we're trying to gate these things. There's no overnight stays. We try to not build places that are, conducive to staying overnight. So we are constantly thinking about that in the design process.
Okay. Let's be pretty excited for the neighborhood. I mean, it's going to be a real nice part, so. I don't see any more questions. Terry, thank you so much. Great presentation. I appreciate that, and look forward to us moving on throughout the phase. So thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Councilmember, we are adjourned. So, adjourned.